Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Fed Insider, and on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, Optiv, ClearShark, Appgate, and Illumio, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, North, South, East, West, Navigating the Value of Microsegmentation in a Zero Trust Environment. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's conversation, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides and other reading materials on the topic. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. If you want to follow along with us today, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all polling questions and stay online for the duration of the conversation. And now, let me turn it over to today's moderator, John Breeden from Fed Insider. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Claudia. And hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and I'll be moderating what I know is going to be a lively and very interesting discussion about new ways to enhance cybersecurity in government by having advanced techniques like microsegmentation and zero trust work together. Now, at the federal level, zero trust is mandated through Executive Order 1428, and several guidance memos like the one from OMB have followed on that. Along the way, many agencies have started to use microsegmentation tactics like Zero Trust Segmentation, or ZTS, and also Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA, as central elements of a comprehensive Zero Trust architecture. Doing that can prevent attackers from moving within a network in key ways, and we're going to learn about all of that on the show today. Now, today's show is also going to be 90 minutes long because we have brought you the most incredible panel of guests consisting of 8 amazing government and industry experts who can help explain these new technologies and how to best employ them today. So I'm super excited to get the show started. I know all of you are as well. So let me welcome our speakers today, and then we can begin. First off, let me say hello to Jennifer Franks, the Director for the Center for Enhanced Cybersecurity with the Government Accountability Office and a frequent guest here at these Fed Insider shows. Jennifer, we really appreciate you coming to talk with us about another amazing topic. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We're also fortunate enough to have Jay Bonci, the Chief Technology Officer in the Office of the CIO for the Department of the Air Force. Jay, we're really honored to have you with us today to talk about this really critical topic. Welcome.
Super happy to be here, John.
Excellent. We also have Bob Kimball, the Senior Research Scientist for Cybersecurity with the U.S. Army DEVCOM C5 ISR Center. Bob, it really is an honor to have you joining the discussion today. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Excellent. Wayne Rogers is also joining us. He is the Zero Trust Lead with the Department of Education. Wayne, given your expertise, it's really great to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Now, joining us for the Navy is Tammy Loki. She is the Zero Trust and Cyber Readiness Staffer with the Department of the Navy's Naval Information Warfare Center, a really fascinating place. Tammy, we're really happy to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. Our first industry guest is someone with a really great reputation for zero trust and microsegmentation knowledge. Mark Monacetti, is the Senior Director and Practice Lead with Optiv plus ClearShark. Mark, I know how busy you are, especially this time of year, so thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, John. I feel like an Olympic hopeful.
Excellent. And another well-known guest joining us today is Gary Bartlett. He is the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer with Illumio. Gary, we really appreciate you joining us today and to share your knowledge about this critical topic. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, John. I appreciate you having me.
Great. And last but certainly not least, we are extremely lucky to have one more well-known expert with us today, Jonathan Roy, the Principal Security Architect with Appgate, and someone who really lives and breathes these technologies. He's joining us today as well. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, John. I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, thank you all again so much for being here. Now, at this point in the show, I would normally take some time for each of our guests to talk a little bit about their backgrounds, but we have so many excellent speakers today. I want to dive right into the topic so that they can start sharing their knowledge with you in our audience today. But almost needless to say, all of our guests today have incredibly impressive backgrounds and careers. You can learn about all of them in our resources section. So I would encourage our audience today to do that and learn a little bit more about the impressive people that we are going to be spending the next 90 minutes with. Okay, let's dive into it then by level setting things for our audience today about the key topics we're going to be talking about: zero trust, microsegmentation, and then some advanced topics like I previously mentioned ZTS and ZTNA. Jennifer, let's begin with you if that's okay, because I know how much of an expert you are on this topic, especially when it comes to zero trust. So it's a good place to start, I think. We should probably begin today by defining why zero trust is so important. What are the key advantages that agencies need to achieve with zero trust compared with traditional security that really justifies implementing it in government, given that it's a fairly challenging architecture with a lot of different components?
So thanks for asking that question. And I only pretend to be an expert. All of us are here collaboratively together. So I appreciate that. But the core idea behind zero trust architecture is really, for those of you who may not be as familiar, is just that no actor is inherently trusted. And that therefore we're going to just continually verify anything and everything attempting to establish access into our organization's resources. And for that reason, validating identity, who you are, who you say you are, is just really inherently vital to ensuring that the right information is accessed by the right users at the right time and for the right purposes. And zero trust really provides the opportunity to reduce the threat attack surface for our organizations. And what it is we've been doing is looking at the more traditional perimeter-based security approaches for quite some time. And how we've approached security traditionally is just not as useful as it used to be. As you know, cascading events from around the globe are happening each and every day. And it's just more helpful now to look at more of an attribute security protections. And that's what zero trust gives to us. But it's not a really one size all organizational fit for any of our organizations. We have to look at the size, mission complexity of our organizations, the business needs, the critical efforts, how we need to protect our agency mission, our data. And there are a variety of ways our various organizations really take heed to modernizing our systems and even aligning our strategies architecturally with strategic goals and objectives to really support the key emphasis of identity management. Again, looking at who we are, who we say we are, and what it is we need to know within the confines of our organization. And as we're focusing on identity management, which is one of the key foundational pillars of zero trust architecture, we really looked at the broad adoption of strategies we've inherently had for quite some time. We're looking at multi-factor authentication. We're looking at phishing resistant efforts to just look at how we're building upon those multi-factor authentication attributes. We're looking at improving event logging capabilities so that we can detect anomalous behavior in our networks. We're looking at ubiquitous encryption devices and looking at how we can manage our data at rest and in transit, and a whole host of other technologies that are really going to be helpful to just continuously monitor our services for our organizations.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Great explanation. I appreciate you level setting that for our audience to get everybody on the same page. Now, Gary, moving over to you and continuing with our kind of level setting, the other major topic that we're talking about today is microsegmentation and how these two technologies can kind of work together. In the show's introduction, I mentioned some different terms like ZTS and ZTNA, and I want to make sure our audience understands what all that means before we start tossing those around today. So could you explain what they are and how they work together in a microsegmented environment?
Absolutely, John. So, let's start with ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. So that's how decisions are made about things coming in and out of your enterprise, right? So kind of north-south, that's what we refer to as that north-south traffic coming in and out of your enterprise. ZTS is Zero Trust Segmentation. That's creating some barriers, some hurdles inside of your enterprise so that you divide up your enterprise and you control traffic as it moves east-west across your enterprise laterally. Then ideally what you have is you have those two solutions working hand in hand so that decisions that as things change inside your enterprise, so new applications come on board, that information is handed off to the ZTNA solution, much like handing off a baton, so that now decisions can be made about users accessing that new application that's come on board. So in a nutshell, right, ZTNA, north-south, making decisions about who's allowed into application, into an environment, what applications they should be accessing. Zero Trust Segmentation is about dividing that enterprise up into smaller and smaller segments so that a breach in one doesn't affect everything. And then also ideally providing a feedback loop back to the ZTNA solution so that as things change inside the enterprise, new applications come on board, the ZTNA solution stays up to date on what things should be granted access to.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Gary. That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate you explaining that. I understand it more than I did before as well. So that's great. Thank you. Now, Wayne, I wanted to also ask you in this kind of part of the show about your thoughts on the need for zero trust, because I know you're the zero trust lead for the Department of Education, but you also serve on various government-wide groups for implementing zero trust. So what is really driving that need in government? I mean, obviously we have the mandates and all that, but why is zero trust technically so critical for agencies like the Department of Education and others?
Great question. So as far as that goes, you go all the way back to the SolarWinds attack. And even before that, we really should have been looking at zero trust, right? Some of the technologies have been in place for quite some time. Of course, we're implementing new technologies like the Department of Education we have with Secure Access Service Edge, kind of going what Gary just said with ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. But ultimately, the foundation, we're looking at to be identity-centric, data-centric, protecting, the identity of users, making sure they are who they say they are, and the data that we're accessing, right? So the traditional castle and moat model, defense and debt model, worked for, quite some time, but it still had its flaws. At this point now, especially in response to, the pandemic, COVID, remote workforce, and migrating a lot of applications into cloud environments, the perimeter has definitely shifted. I would not ever say the perimeter is dead. The perimeter has changed, though. The perimeter is everywhere now, right? You're not just coming in through different internet access points within DoD, where I used to be at for over 10 years. You're not just coming in through the MTIPs anymore and, trusted internet connection 2 and 2.2 from CISA. Ultimately, we have been, I would say, migrating away from that model. So that way we can mainly focus on protecting data and protecting the users. With this being identity centric as well, I would say in large part, a good 90+% of breaches are still due to weak usernames and passwords, right? So I would say that's a key foundational piece as identity, ICAM, anyone's going to say if they know zero trust, is making sure that we have strong phishing resistant multi-factor authentication is a key thing. That's a key foundation listed in memorandums. The thing is, though, like you just said, it shouldn't just be in response to the executive order and associated OMB memorandums. These are things that we should have been doing all this time, right? I would like to also say new capabilities are one thing, but in my time here at the Department of Ed, we've been maturing in zero trust at a very rapid pace over the last 2.5 years. But it also comes down to basic cyber hygiene, right? So, when I have done, independent audits and stuff of different firewall configurations and all, many different places have very wide open, rule sets and security rules, right? That said, even if you have, castle moat these different devices over time, we've been looking to lock down security policies and such to make sure we are taking into effect, who's accessing the data, making sure we're operating at the application layer, not just, based on ports, IPs, and protocols and such, but pretty much making sure that we're going all the way up and being as granular as possible when creating security policies. And again, once more, I've said it a couple of times, this stuff should have been done for years, right? So zero trust, we are not just bolting on new technologies, but also, taking advantage of what we had this entire time and making it better.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Wayne. I have a lot of interesting questions for you along those lines later on in the show. Thank you so much for your thoughts today. So, Bob, now you work at the Army's DEVCOM C5 ISR Center, so you get to look at zero trust and segmentation and the whole concept of east-west, north-south traffic a bit differently than some of our other guests. I suspect that some of those in our audience from various DoD agencies are probably in the same situation. So could you explain some of the unique aspects of Zero Trust for you so that our audience can kind of understand your perspective, especially for some of the questions I have for you later in the show?
Sure. So, yeah, especially in terms of north-south traffic, I don't really have much, right? So connectivity to the internet is virtually non-existent. I mean, it's not zero, but it's not a big part of the tactical environment that we're trying to institute zero trust into. So, I mean, we do have connectivity between echelons, and that does somewhat count as north-south. But for the most part, all of our traffic is east-west traffic. And what we're really trying to do, and especially in terms of macro segmentation, is at the system level. So whether it's a targeting system, a fire system, a logistics system, put in the macro segmentation at that level. And I'm not, so everything for me is east-west. I really say everything is inside my environment. So from a things I worry about kind of perspective, I have a probably it's growing all the time, a mix of machine generated, sensor generated traffic and human traffic. And I need to mix both of those types of traffic in intelligently to make sure that the right data gets to the right person at the right time, and in order to provide the zero trust controls that make this stuff work. Over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Bob. And I have some interesting questions for you along those lines in just a bit. So thank you for joining us. So, Tammy, what Bob said probably resonates a lot with the folks in the DoD services. Now, you are this Zero Trust and Cyber Readiness staffer at the Naval Information Warfare Center Atlantic. So let me ask you this. The Navy, you guys have a lot of mobile assets like ships, airplanes, and helicopters and vehicles, as well as traditional computing infrastructure like servers, data centers, and cloud computing assets. How does that complicate the zero trust initiatives compared to, say, maybe a civilian agency that does not need to figure out how to make their land-based zero trust assets work with their assets that are out at sea?
When it comes to zero trust, it's done the same as anywhere else. The big difference that we have is the fact that we will have more microsegmentation because we have the ships and the vehicles and land and sea. So when it comes to like the shipboards, we're more focused on a satellite infrastructure versus on shore, we have the fiber networks. And so when you're doing your microsegmentation, you're coming off of different satellites or you're coming off of different fiber lines. So it's implemented the same in a way, but it's also different because you have more moving parts. You have some networks that connect to each other. We have some networks that actually stand alone. It's like if you had a company that had nodes in different countries that didn't connect to each other. And so that's pretty much how the Navy is. We have different components, different moving parts, and different PEOs, of course. So you have different program offices that are running in different portions of the network. So it's a challenge, but we're working our way through it.
Excellent. I have some interesting questions for you in just a bit. So thank you for level setting that for us. This is going to be a really great discussion, I'm sure. So, Mark, we also want to talk about some of the challenges of zero trust and microsegmentation, both with implementation and also some of the challenges that will help to overcome that. Maybe you could break down or some use cases for us or different threat types that zero trust, and especially zero trust when integrated properly with microsegmentation, can specifically help to overcome.
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. Let me start with an answer that might be a little controversial. We have to think about cyber risk differently when we're talking about zero trust. The factors may be outdated because we use likelihood and impact as factors to determine risk. Well, now, because we assume breach, theoretically, we should be concentrating on impact because likelihood's maxed out, right? So now we turn our efforts to reducing the blast radius. If some adverse event occurs, we need to contain the damage. Microsegmentation achieves this goal. The basic types of threats that we might encounter are insider accidental, insider malicious, and everything external. That's the way we used to classify our threats. But as I just mentioned, with the zero trust approach, there's no inside or outside. And as Wayne said, it's a perimeterless approach, right? And we are suspicious of everything, really. Microsegmentation capabilities give us the opportunity to reduce the blast radius by making the notion of north, south, east, west network-based controls a reality. There are operational benefits too, though. I no longer need an army of network engineers to maintain a segmented network scenario. Microsegmentation is centrally managed and software defined. The microsegmentation capabilities give a validated and authorized person just-in-time access and replaces the old perimeter-based ineffective security approach and helps contain adverse events and hopefully win the gold medal.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Jay, I know that you are deep into zero trust over at the Air Force. So let me ask you about the various stages or concentrations for those efforts. For our audience today who are kind of looking at zero trust and maybe trying to figure out how to get started or where to go, could you explain the various forms that it can take and what each one of those can do?
Sure. So the way that we think about zero trust is it's not a specific program or a specific product, but it's an architectural imperative. And we have guidelines from DoD CIO that are rooted in best practices, but essentially they ask us to kind of carry the torch on these sort of 7 key areas. And we've had other panelists talk about things like the identity tier, making sure that we know who you are. We have elements such as the network segmentation to make sure that even when you are authorized, again, to kind of assume breach, as Mark said, to make sure that you can't laterally move around the network, or if an application or a server gets compromised, it has limited sort of east-west lateral movement. But to mention a couple of other areas that are key to this conversation, the first of which is devices. And so we have to make sure that we have clean device health. So that any endpoint that you're on isn't compromised. And that means that those endpoints can't be used as a launching off point to be able to scour the network or to be able to exfil information from the DoD networks. And we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that we only allow kind of clean government issued devices. And really this matches what any normal commercial organization would do in making sure that you have a strong device policy. You have the right bring your own device policy for mobile, and you're securing all of the ways that you use to get access to data because they are such a threat vector. One other area as well is really rising to the challenge of the visibility and analytics portions of it, and making sure that you're monitoring the amount of not zero trust, but of security events that are now under visibility by monitoring and applying these security controls. And this is a huge challenge for organizations of any size. You often need to have a very robust SIEM infrastructure, a very robust SOAR infrastructure, and often having some AI or ML based tools to help your security response teams scale to the level of cyber events that are now coming your way. They're coming your way today, even if you're not watching, but oftentimes that visibility and that traffic monitoring bubbles it up to that volume. And I do want to say that, anytime you're introducing an AI or an ML-based tool, you should really consult your organization's guidelines on responsible and ethical AI use for how you introduce and then eventually come to rely upon those tools. So there are a lot of different elements necessary to get to that end state of a holistic zero trust view. And it's a very long journey. It touches application architecture. It touches the networking, as we're talking about very heavily today. It touches, the digital transformation of how you do identities and the authorization practices around those identities. So it's got so many different things that force you to kind of upend the way that you're looking at security. It's a big job for anybody, and with organizations the size of any military department, it's an especially large job.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Thank you, Jay. You're great. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And Jonathan, I wanted to give you the last word in this section today of the show, because I know that you and AppGate, you kind of get to see an overview of different kinds of zero trust deployments and microsegmentation starting points. At, like Jay was just saying, they're kind of complicated. There's a lot of different ways you can approach it. So could you talk about where people are most likely to begin with this effort, regardless of if they're in DoD or a civilian agency? What groundwork really needs to be done before we can even really start to get into some of those advanced concepts?
Yeah, usually when we're having a zero trust engagement, it typically starts with one of two things. Either, they've been mandated to meet the zero trust requirements, whether it's through the executive order, or more commonly what I'm seeing now, it's in direct response to a breach. But from a technology and process perspective, I see there's probably three different areas from a starting point that we normally engage with. It's typically starting with user access, which means, ICAM related. So having an identity store that has, at least mature enough attributes to understand who the types of users are, and making sure that we can actually make policy that dictates based on this person's job function or role. These are the types of applications they should have access to. So that'd be the first type I come across. The second would be kind of more of the application side, where maybe there's been a risk assessment done. And as Mark was saying earlier, this may be getting away from availability and down to more of like a business impact or a mission impact. And maybe the crown jewels are where you want to focus on. So starting with more of an east-west approach. The last one, which I'd say I come across probably less often, is more of the data-centric, where it's more e-discovery, where an organization wants to do data classification and data labeling, but now they want to do enforcement on that type of ecosystem they've put a lot of effort into. But regardless of where you start, if I had to put all these on a podium, I'd say normally it's going to be, ZTNA access for the north-south, which is, for my definition, is users accessing the app. Then it's going to be that east-west where I've put boundaries around it. But from a challenge perspective, what I've come across is really, whether you start with the user coming in or the east-west portion, it's the tough part is, now that you've identified, here's these types of applications and maybe they have this type of sensitivity, because there's so many different controls and technologies that you can apply with zero trust. What should the security controls be to access this certain app? Because now you can take advantage of, not only did I authenticate and is my device compliant, but what's my risk score, or are there security events outside of this ecosystem, maybe in my SIM tool, or what do I consider compliant? Is 80% stick compliant good enough? So there's so many different factors that you can put into, should I have access? I mean, even something as simple as, what's the geographic location of the user? What building are they in? Should all those be elements? And it's difficult to, see an organization kind of transform from a very siloed approach, which is the network team does network things, application teams does application things. But now all these teams are having to work together to come up with a overarching security plan that, you can implement and then manage afterward. So, again, if I had to put these on a podium, 1, 2, 3, it's typically user coming in north-south, then east-west, and then kind of the data-centric piece. But at the end of all of it, you're going to have to make all of them work together. So that's my approach on it, John.
Yeah, no, excellent. That's a great way to wrap up the level setting part of the show. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that, Jonathan. Thank you all actually for level setting and explaining things for our audience. I think everybody's probably on the same page now, and I'm sure they appreciate that. And for our audience today, I'd also like to invite all of you to please submit any questions you might have for our panel today. I'm looking, and some of you are already submitting some really great questions, so we really appreciate that. We're going to try to get to some of your questions live on the show today, but there's not enough time. We will round them all up and send them to our speakers afterwards. So in either case, please keep those questions coming in. You really don't want to miss a chance to get any zero trust or microsegmentation questions in front of our incredibly talented panel of guests today. We also have some great reading material available in our resources section today. Confessions of a Zero Trust Practitioner is available from our friends at Optiv plus ClearShark, and Securing the Tactical Edge, How ZTNA Safeguards Mission Critical Military Operations is available from AppGate. That's on our resources section. Both of those papers are really great reading if you want some further research on this topic. Okay, so let's now dive into zero trust and microsegmentation a bit deeper now and get into some great advice from our panel about how to do it, what stages to implement it in what order, and also some potential challenges that our audience might face when going on what is probably going to be a fairly long journey. So, Gary, let me begin with you in this section. You and all of our guests today have pointed out some of the advantages and challenges of zero trust and microsegmentation, but it seems like a really, at least from my perspective, it seems like a really complex process. So let me ask you, as one of the leading experts in this area, are we talking about, do agencies need to like fully redo everything and start moving towards better security with zero trust and microsegmentation? Or are there any simple things that they can do right now to maybe get some real benefits without having to first re-architect everything?
John, thanks for that question. It's a great question. So, first, a lot of people think that when they get into start talking about microsegmentation, that this is a very advanced topic. They got to score a perfect 10 in order to accomplish microsegmentation. What I often talk to people about is the fact that really there are so many different ways you can implement segmentation rules and get some immediate bang for your buck inside of your enterprise. So, for instance, imagine deploying a segmentation rule that says only my web servers are allowed to talk to the internet. Now, if I'm in a true zero trust architecture, that means I'm going to write rules that allow web servers to talk to the internet, and everything else is denied, which means no other server is allowed to talk to the internet. So now imagine if you think about breaches in the past where a server gets compromised and data gets exfiltrated off of that server. Why? Because that server, usually unbeknownst to the people running the network, had access to the internet, and it should have never had access to the internet. And the reason that happens is those rules are most commonly put in place in firewalls, some sort of IDS, IPS. They're putting it at the boundary. Well, that boundary starts to turn into Swiss cheese as so many changes are made. Things come online. They don't take out old rules. So that's not a very effective way of doing it. If you did it at the host-based level and you said, I'm going to pick specific machines in my enterprise that are allowed to talk to the internet, those are the only ones that are allowed to talk to the internet. No other machines are allowed to talk to the internet. It doesn't matter what your boundary looks like because you're going down to the individual machine level saying you're allowed to talk to the internet or you're not allowed to talk to the internet. Same can be said for accepting certain protocols or not. We have there are very common protocols that are the most common protocols used by malware and by adversaries. Think RDP, FTP, things that should not be widespread across an enterprise. And yet when you go into most modern enterprises today, those high threat protocols are wide open across their enterprise. Come in to do segmentation and say, I'm not going to allow those protocols across my enterprise. I'm going to turn those high risk protocols off so that those ports, those protocols cannot be used across my enterprise. So there are some very, very quick kill kind of things that can be done to segment your enterprise that you don't necessarily have to have a very deep granular understanding of your enterprise, which most people don't, which shouldn't surprise anybody on this call. But being able to start high level, you can target very specific applications and say, I'm gonna ring fence around a specific application, and I'm gonna put some protections in place because this is one of my crown jewels, and I'm gonna protect that application. So if something bad happens somewhere else in my enterprise, I know that my crown jewels are protected. So there are some very quick ways that you can start to implement. And again, you don't have to score a perfect 10. You can start to implement some very high level, simple kinds of rules that allow you to gain a much greater security posture in your enterprise without necessarily having to go to a very granular level across your enterprise.
Yeah, no, that's great, Gary. Great advice. Thank you so much for that. Jay, I had a question for you. I wanted to ask about starting points for Zero Trust based on what you said in the previous section, but I had a really brilliant audience question come in that I thought I would address to you instead, or maybe in addition to. And the audience member asked about, obviously, a really hot topic, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and if those can be used for Zero Trust or maybe even need to be used for proper Zero Trust these days.
So AI and ML are getting baked into every type of security product that we deploy these days, right? And you see this especially for cloud-based solutions where a lot of the value proposition is that they're running a fairly advanced AI-backed security model as a part of their service. And so whenever you are evaluating a product to come on board, you do need to ask yourself what components are driven by AI and ML, and how does that meet your sort of organizational intent in terms of explainability and understandability of those solutions. And so one of the things that we do grapple with is trying to understand, when we have a security model or we have something that's doing anomaly detection, how much of that is left up to the vendor, how much of that should be a government delivered model. And this is a sort of an active conversation in how we do those types of deployments. What I would say is broadly, the push to have smarter security that is backed by very powerful AI models, I think is overall a positive. And it is something that is going to be baked in to absolutely everything. I mean, I think we've all seen over the last couple of years how generative AI has gotten baked into absolutely every product under the sun, right? Chat GPT can do, and all the other LLM models that do a lot of this stuff on the generative AI side are integrated with things and baked into things and a lot of that. So I think it is something that we should embrace. We should make sure that policy properly supports that, because it is going to be the key factor in driving that asymmetry between defenders and attackers. And so we're going to have to get smarter with these products. We're going to have to get more comfortable with smarter products and really push our organizations to break some of the cultural habits of having to have like an operator look at every single security event, right? Like there is going to be a lot of change that the volume, scale, and sophistication of these of the security ecosystem is really gonna kind of force us to change our relationship to both data and really the specifics of like, maybe we don't have to have hands-on keyboard for every single policy, right? And AI can get us 80% the way there. So it's going to be key to achieving the scale, especially in a globally competitive baseline for us in the military.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for answering the audience member's question. That was great. And then let me ask you the original question that I wanted to ask you in this section was, in the previous section, you had talked about the 3 different areas of Zero Trust, and then Gary sort of talked about some smart things that you can do kind of at a macro level to get things started. But based on the 3 kind of areas that you said we should concentrate on, which one is the best one to start with for most folks, would you say? Jay, I think you might be muted.
Oh, of course I did that. So there are, if you think of each of those kind of major arenas where you are doing that segmentation, right? The north, south, the east, west, and then probably inside of the application itself to get to a micro-segmented architecture. In terms of those 3 areas, you're going to be looking for us. Just programmatically, east-west was going to be much easier for us to achieve because you don't have to do as much integration with individual applications. And so the scale of having to talk to each app and then integrate it with a north-south guard is where we're starting, because we have good sort of centralized configuration control over the back end. And so we're able to push that out through centralized configuration management. But we are still undertaking the longer term architectural changes of getting our identity up to speed and doing the business process transformation of changing the way we do authorization and getting everybody into single sign-on that we can continue to enrich. And so honestly, the way I would encourage and the Air Force is fortunate to have that good sort of centralized configuration control over a lot of the services to push east-west segmentation. But there may be, for different organizations, you may find that, hey, north-south and just replacing your VPNs is the best way forward. So I would encourage people to evaluate the kind of human network of communication you need to achieve. in order to implement Zero Trust. And so for us, because we do have that central point of control, we thought, okay, let's sort of push out these changes, and then we will also be continuing our identity and our devices and our seam SOAR changes that we need to make. But so we're trying to walk and chew gum and do the shorter term, faster security tightening elements, as well as the longer term enterprise improvements necessary to get to that kind of holistic end state.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. And thanks again for answering some of our audience's amazing questions. So, Tammy, let me ask you about DoD challenges for Zero Trust specifically. As I understand it, and what some of our other guests have mentioned on other shows that I've been in, there's no real blanket policy for how it should be implemented within DoD. So each service is kind of plotting their own course, if I can use a Navy analogy with you. Given that, I mean, what helpful frameworks or advice would you recommend for your colleagues within the DoD that really need to move security in this direction like we're talking about today?
Well, the DoD, we have a program office that's for Zero Trust within DoD. We meet bi-weekly, and then on some cases we meet weekly, depending on the topic. They have a Zero Trust strategy as well as a framework that everyone is adapting to. One of the things that the Navy is doing is we're implementing with course of action number 2. They have 3 that are options that you can use, which is transform what you have. That would be the first COA. Second one is to use cloud computing. And then the third one would be on-premise cloud. So for the most part, the Navy is using flank speed for our cloud. So that's the COA 2. But on our shipboards, we're moving more towards the on-premise cloud so that the shipboards are not lagging by trying to connect to a shore site. They're connecting on a ship. So there are instances where you want to use 2 different COAs or you want to merge them together. It's better, at least for us from a Navy perspective, because of how complex and large we are, it's better to do it from a systems engineering approach versus going at it in a different manner. So we're more geared towards the cyber readiness, so that we're using continuous monitoring on our ATOs, so that it's not just, you get approved, you sit there, you sit stagnant. It's more of you get your ATO. We have Zero Trust security controls that are being applied to the systems, and we're moving forward with a systems engineering approach.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, the systems engineering approach for the Navy makes complete sense given how complicated your environment is. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, there's nothing on the civilian side that's even close to the complexity that you're dealing with in the Navy, I would assume.
All right.
Absolutely. All right, Jennifer, let me ask you this, because as we all know in government and really in the private sector too, but we hear it a lot in government, everything comes down to, yes, you guessed it, budget, of course. So given that, what are some of the ways that agencies can kind of track and show a return on investment or ROI to help justify their Zero Trust initiatives and their investment in microsegmentation, not just for the GAO, which eventually is obviously going to be auditing that process, but also just to show their senior leadership and their agencies how to help justify those expenses? I mean, it's really hard to justify a security program. Hey, we didn't get attacked. I mean, but is there any metrics that you can actually use for security that can kind of show that all this effort that we're putting into it is worthwhile?
So, very good question. And, I love that you mentioned not just the GAO, who will eventually be auditing the process, because several of my federal colleagues here have been subject to one of our audits, and no one's really excited when we come knocking. But our goal is always to really be committed to enhancing cyber protections. We work for the betterment of American people, helping Congress to just highlight, some of the potential weaknesses and make them stronger. So we're really looking at this question. The simplest answer is there really isn't ever enough money. And right now we're in some difficult days, especially coming through fiscal year 24, going into fiscal year 25, where we're already discussing some budget crunching. and budgeting for new IT investments, emerging technologies, and then the known and unknown cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities is just really extremely difficult. And there really are just a lot of nuances within all of our organizations for just understanding the budgeting lifecycle process. And it really is a full process. And like you said, you were talking about the impact of, yeah, I didn't get breached. I don't have a major incident, but how do you really show this return on investment? And to sometimes it really is just beneficial for you to just highlight some of your implemented metrics and then show the progress of how they have been beneficial to your organization. And to be honest, given the temperature of what this fiscal year, this calendar year has really been for us, cybersecurity threats happening around the globe, escalating every single day. You know, we're in the world of CrowdStrike right now, in the week of CrowdStrike. And, you know, I'm hoping to catch a flight out of the country on Friday. Will I make it out of Atlanta? I don't know. But using some of these really active events and live scenarios with lessons learned, we can use these active case studies as examples where applicable. You know, starting with perhaps even your cybersecurity awareness training, where all of us as good cyber tech citizens for our organizations need to be aware of good cyber hygiene practices and highlighting how successful your program is, including your phishing exercises, because oftentimes the trajectory of some of our incidents starts in-house, where those unwitting employees are still clicking on those links that are coming in their emails. And it's not malicious, but it just happens. But showing your leadership what is happening and how it's impacting your environment could start to just kind of show some metrics as to what it is you need to do to maybe enhance some of your training initiatives. Then perhaps show some metrics in how you need to identify some strengths and even potential weaknesses in your ICAM, perhaps. Then that's looking at your identity, credential, and access management tools. And while that's important, is thinking about zero trust again, focusing on the person, the identity, the devices. You need to show your agency leadership, you know, how you are as an organization able to securely track the resources across your enterprise and all of the emerging technologies. And discuss your networking monitoring capabilities, your logging capacity needs, so that the leadership can have a full breadth and depth as to, you know, what it's going to effectively take for your IT and cyber teams to effectively assess if a bad actor is either attempting to access your environment or perhaps they've already actually entered your computing environment and we need to take action. Sometimes even taking these live scenarios, the CrowdStrikes, the SolarWinds, the Microsoft data breaches, and using these backwards as information sharing lessons learned, it really does help to show where the priorities need to be made in the budgeting process.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. And thank you for bringing up CrowdStrike. We have some questions on that I'm going to address to some of our guests in just a little bit. So thank you for explaining all that and always for talking about the budget process. Critically important for everybody listening in today, I'm sure. So Jonathan, over to you. I have a question for you, but I wanted to ask you, we had an audience question about the differences in zero trust and microsegmentation in DoD versus civilian agencies. I wanted to see, since I know you get to work with both of those groups, what are some of the key differences and especially the challenges really that DoD faces that maybe civilian agencies don't have as much?
Yeah, there's two kind of fundamental pieces that I see different. One is more use case driven, one is more compliance driven. So from a use case perspective, I'm not saying that the commercial or Fed Civ space doesn't have, as hard of a requirement, but I've seen much more of kind of like isolated / air gapped style networks, or even kind of the tactical edge or DDIL requirements be more of a DoD focus. Not to say that there aren't those use cases, like for instance, in the kind of the oil and gas industry where they may have, oil rigs offshore where there's a disconnected state, but in the same breath, they still need to have the right user get access to the right data at the right time. But I do see that more prevalent in the DoD space. But from a kind of compliance perspective, whether you're talking about, CNSSP-11, which kind of defines the requirements for protecting national security system data, that then kind of lends you down this path of, well, what are the qualifications and certifications needed to address this from a DoD and NSA perspective. So you now have to have products that have gone through, common criteria or NIAP protection profile. Or if you're dealing in the, classified space, you're going to be looking at things like commercial solutions for classified. So I'd say those are the unique things about, technology products operating in the DoD side. And yeah, that's I guess that's for me kind of the summary of kind of how I would align those two pieces of what makes DoD unique.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's good. And we had actually a couple audience questions along those lines. So I appreciate you sort of addressing that for us. That makes a lot of sense. Bob, before the show, you and I were talking a little bit about some of the advantages of zero trust and microsegmentation, and you mentioned the concept to me of positive feedback and how that could be set up within an environment like that, and how powerful a tool it was. I thought that was really fascinating. So I wanted to wonder if you could maybe explain for our audience how that works and how we could set that up, and how it's really a powerful component to zero trust and segmentation that's sometimes overlooked.
Sure. So, if I think about microsegmentation, I think in terms of granularity and transactionality. So very fine differences between access and portions of the network that are available to certain users and not available to other users. But that stuff's really, really hard, right? So the chances of you getting it right the first time, the second time, the third time, however many tries it takes you to get to your goal is something you need to embrace. The fact that what you're trying to do is it's hard to do on the eaches. It's a gargantuan task at scale. So if you introduce this concept of feedback, whether you want to call it continuous improvement, because it certainly falls within that same realm of what you're thinking of doing, where you basically you define metrics. So I mean, some easy metrics that are very well known are some like false negatives. Every time you denied an authorized user access to an application or some data, that's a metric. Or a false positive every time you've allowed someone that shouldn't have access to have access into the system. And then every organization needs to define for themselves, given their business environment, what they're trying to do, how they view the confidentiality and integrity of the data that they're trying to protect. And they can either they can accept false negatives or not accept false negatives. If they can accept false positives or not accept false positives. And I can certainly envision an IC, intelligence community type environment, where false negatives are fine. It's the cost of doing business. You can't have any false positives. No one can get at those crown jewels that doesn't have the right access. On the other hand, if I'm operating an air defense battery, I can't deal with any false negatives. Anybody that needs access to that data had better get it, and they better get it right when they need it. And if I have some bad guys in my network, well, okay, that's the price I accept of doing that kind of business. And as you're thinking about metrics and things you can measure, you also have to be able to put bounds around what's possible, right? So if we think about like the recent events with CrowdStrike and that whole mess there, think about what happened. I have an authorized user doing an authorized update to authorized software. Zero Trust wouldn't have helped very much with that at all. And so if I'm going to prevent that, there are other things I could do. There are other cyber paradigms that specifically seek to address correctness of software, or and things like that. And there's also a whole raft of things you can do around testing that would have detected that. Whereas the Zero Trust is probably the wrong tool to help us through that kind of situation. And then I don't want to get into this, but there's a whole concept around cyber resilience and your ability to not put all of your eggs in one basket, have one single mistake have such a large impact, and that's another big piece of it. So the big thing with the positive feedback, and that's just my term, but whether it's continuous monitoring or continuous improvement, is that you keep your training and your training and your training to get to that next level where you can actually compete at the highest arena. And you keep improving your segmentation, you keep improving your rules, you keep improving your policies until you get and see the level of metrics that you're appropriate for your environment. The other thing, and this is very true, certainly for the military and especially for the Army, is the adversary is playing on the same field we are, and so policies and rules and that may have been entirely appropriate and proper for a certain environment may no longer be the right set of rules and policies that you want in place when the adversary is doing X or Y. And so having a flexible system that can adapt and overcome to what the adversary is doing. Now you're getting into these multiplication or multiplicative aspects of Zero Trust. That's what makes Zero Trust so incredibly powerful, is because it's not static. It's not a static defense. It can be a dynamic system that can that you can use to operate even under very adverse conditions. Over.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. No, that makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate your perspective today. This is great. I'm so glad you're here with us. Wayne, I have a question for you, but I wanted to the audience question. We've actually gotten a lot of audience questions about the whole CrowdStrike thing. So I wanted to ask you, kind of in terms. I mean, Bob addressed this a little bit. I mean, we're talking about Zero Trust and microsegmentation. That might not have helped too much in this case, or would have. What's your thoughts on Zero Trust and segmentation as it relates to something like what just happened with CrowdStrike?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Bob, everything you just said. I mean, from a CrowdStrike perspective, one of the things the Department of Ed is doing right now, I would say, now that we've rolled out multiple capabilities, we're looking at a cloud access security broker right next. And one of the things there is it can identify misconfigurations in an environment and make recommendations, at least with the tool that we have selected. It's pretty much cloud security posture management. The problem is, even with that, right, CrowdStrike had a misconfiguration, but as Bob just said, it was rolled out after it was tested. The testing did not show that there would be any problem. So even something that I just said, like a CASB solution, is very likely not going to prevent that from happening. CASB is going to be a part of our Zero Trust architecture, but that is not something that's going to help, based on what I've read, at least, on what CrowdStrike, how that misconfiguration was applied. Going through proper, SAS and DAS testing in accordance with the application pillar of Zero Trust, in accordance with the Zero Trust maturity model, on paper, it should catch something like that. Again, the problem, as Bob just said, it did not, right? So that they had tools in place. You have to have proper tools in place. They have a tool that's worked for years. They've tested these types of updates before, and they've never had this issue before. So unfortunately, things like this will still happen, most likely, right? Not most likely, it absolutely will still happen, as it just happened with CrowdStrike. So not too much more to add that, I think, but just adding Department of Ed's journey and Zero Trust and what we're looking at deploying, even stuff like that's not going to help necessarily all the time.
Yeah, no, it's a lot to think about. It's such a complicated environment, Wayne. Thank you for addressing that. You addressed like 7 audience members' questions with that, so I really appreciate that today. Mark, it sounds like from listening to our other speakers today that both Zero Trust and Zero Trust with different kinds of segmentation are really complex endeavors. And unfortunately, not one solution can get you there. I mean, if there was if somebody created a little black box that you plug into your network and got you everything, I'm sure that they would be $1 billion company overnight. But given that that's not possible, how can agencies decide or evaluate what different products or components they should use to help them move ahead with their Zero Trust or microsegmentation journeys?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So just a thought here, an ancillary benefit of the rise of Zero Trust is that it put pressure on the tech industry to innovate, right? In addition to that, Zero Trust encourages more better together stories. There's no Zero Trust in a box. Some vendors will tell you there just isn't one solution to fit all. So integrations are a great way to get, best in class solutions to work together and to get more from your investments. And further on the subject of impacts to the tech industry, the surge of innovation to fill the technological void that I mentioned means federal agencies are left with a large list of vendor solutions to choose from. The truth is that this is complex. Modernizing network controls is just not trivial. If it was easy, every organization would already have segmented their networks a long time ago. And I know that's just not the case because most clients that I speak to are sitting on a flat network. But also breaches would be down. There'd be no zero trust, and we'd be discussing our favorite cat videos rather than talking about microsegmentation. And I love me a good cat video. So I also encourage people to speak to a trusted advisor or solution provider. Solution providers can provide expert advice and implement leading technology solutions that address government mission mandates and meet the unique needs of federal customers. Not to mention also accelerate your zero trust plans. We also understand that there are places where federal organizations have succeeded and failed, and we've made note of that. And that insight is invaluable to keep in your back pocket there to help achieve your zero trust related goals.
Excellent. Wow, thank you so much. I will see if I can get cat videos onto the Fed Insider schedule just as soon as we get zero trust and microsegmentation worked out. So we'll be ready for that. Thank you all for this fascinating discussion today. I'm learning so much on this topic. I'm sure our audiences as well. Now, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but sort of fortunately, we have so many talented speakers today that our time is actually starting to run into the final part of the show today. But we have more than enough time for me to ask each of our guests one more question before we have to say goodbye today. So, Bob, over to you. Thank you so much for bringing your unique perspective to the show today. It's interesting that in the environments that you work in over at the DoD, that by the time you get to working on zero trust and segmentation, at that point, you're pretty far along in terms of security on those systems. Could you talk about the power of zero trust with segmentation and what that can do for our audience members once they finally achieve it? What can they expect once they reach that significant level of maturity?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to leave this thought picture in everybody's head here. There's a whole cadre of very smart men and women, very dedicated to their country and their ideals, that are working as hard as they can to make sure that my stuff doesn't work. And that's the environment that I have to live in. And so given that I've got this very talented, very smart group of people that are trying to defeat what I'm trying to do and stop the Army and the U.S. from doing whatever policy positions that the U.S. Wants to do, I need something that gets me an advantage on the battlefield. And zero trust is something that's able to do that in a way that none of the other security paradigms that we've looked at over the last couple decades have been able to do. And the reason for that is as we piled more and more stuff onto security stacks and looked at more stuff and sandboxed it and cataloged it and put threat feeds together and all this stuff, we still had a calculus that said if the adversary got lucky, they got in, they could pretty much meet their objective, whatever that objective it is, whether it's damaging data, whether it's just disrupting our ability to do operations or to steal our weapons technology and either use it to limit their development time and their development costs, or to figure out effective counters for the way our stuff works. But zero trust actually changes that calculus, because now, as I mature my zero trust, and I've gotten ICAM solutions, I've got macro segmentation solutions that make things harder to get to. I've got effective policies now. I've got this continuous feedback loop that's allowing me to continually improve the way I look at my security systems so that I'm not veering off in the wrong direction and having too many people that can't access the applications and data they need because my security is too tight. But I also didn't make it too loose, such that the adversaries, it's too easy for them to get in. And so I've gotten this balance kind of right that I never could do before. And what this literally does for me is I've gotten to the place now where the adversary actually has to be lucky a number of times, and better than a number of times in a row, which is non-trivial. And as I get, and microsegmentation becomes one of these really amplifying factors, because as I get more granular with my segmentation, as I get more granular with my policies, that means there's less and less of the network that's available for attackers to exploit. And that means that they have to not only be effective with their exploits, but they have to exploit in the right place at the right time when the access is available to them, and that becomes exponentially harder than an attack during giving the past types of security that we have had. So we really are entering this new world, and that's why there's all these executive orders and impetus to do this, is because it promises a truly new paradigm in terms of security structures, that we can start leveling the playing field so that an attack costs as much or more than the defense does. Over.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Bob. This is really great having you, and shifting the paradigm to give the defenders an advantage. That's quite a great vision. I liked hearing about that. Thank you so much. So, Jonathan, it was really amazing talking with you today. I love how you broke zero trust and microsegmentation down into different stages for us today, talking about the early part. Now, let's talk about kind of the latter part of this journey, where few have gotten to so far, but hopefully they will one day soon. Once you have the basics and some of the advanced concepts covered, where should they go next? I mean, what are really the final pieces to putting together a robust zero trust and microsegmentation strategy that can really lock down systems and data in a way that, kind of like Bob described, where suddenly the defenders have the advantage again, something they haven't had in a number of years?
Yeah, the challenge that I've been seeing is really this kind of almost terrorizing word, which is enterprise. And the second you say the word enterprise and trying to implement anything, you kind of get into this point where people are, super excited to get started with zero trust, and they see it as a sprint, right? And, everybody's trying to get on board, and you have so many different teams within your enterprise trying to say, here's my requirements, here's my use cases. And you may finally come up with an architecture or technology that actually meets your objective. So you think that you're well on your way to zero trust by 2027. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, that's just for my branch. That's just for my agency. How am I going to interoperate with other branches that are doing completely different paths than I am, right? And this could be, Air Force to Army, or Army to Marine Corps. Or now think about coalition partners. So I see some of the bigger challenges as far as kind of you've locked down the right user to the right data at the right time, but 90% of that is focused on users that you own and manage, right? So you have to have flexibility to allow for that kind of information sharing outside of your enterprise. So whether that's, clientless style solutions, or what a utopian solution would be is more of like a completely agnostic, capability, which doesn't really quite exist in the industry today. So that's kind of where I see the challenges coming to head right now. And I think that's why we also see kind of enterprise-wide deployments being a very rare thing that we see. You can, see niche implementations of zero trust at the program level, whether it's for, a particular program office, et cetera. But as far as a enterprise-wide zero trust, you would think this would have been done, a year or two ago, but some organizations are still in the piloting phase. And the reason is it's just so complicated, especially when you think outside of your enterprise. But as we mature with solving for making product A talk to product B and interoperate with other agencies and their technologies, I think we're going to, finally get to that point where we have a zero trust architecture that's manageable and, can be operationalized.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jonathan. It was really great having you with us today. Now, Wayne, this has been an amazing discussion, but it occurs to me that we're kind of mostly talking about how to climb this mountain today, and not so much about the pioneers who have already made that journey, or at least part of the way. I know you're working with other agencies on stage 3 of Zero Trust implementation right now. So you must have seen some success stories at this point. Can you talk about places where Zero Trust and microsegmentation have already been successfully implemented today? I mean, they do exist, I believe, right?
No, absolutely. Great question. Yeah. So I'm really fortunate to really have started, with Zero Trust and DoD as a, network engineer previously, technical lead program manager and such, and starting up Thunderdome and DISA, right? So on that note, coming over to the Department of Education, leading our Zero Trust journey, I would say across the board, microsegmentation, as a lot of folks have said on this call, and I said in the very beginning too, it's not really that complicated. And I would say, though, going back to what I said in the very first question, my response was focusing on, I would call it the macro segmentation first, because a lot of people have lacked on that. And I would say basic cyber hygiene is really the starting point, right? So as far as that goes, across the board, Department of Ed, I'll give our journey real quick, right? We're a technology modernization funded award program. We'll call it a program, right? I started up Zero Trust Architecture PMO here. And we quickly, deployed Secure Access Service Edge, transitioned away from VPN, traditional VPN, really honed in on our security policies through our next-gen firewalls as well as SASE to really get that macro segmentation in place. And so we're now, we're operating at the application layer. We're making sure that we're tying user identities and such into all of our security policies now, not just port, IP, and protocol. And with that, that's Department of Ed's beginning 2 years ago or so. I've helped a number of agencies. I think Department of Interior is a main one that has really taken what I've given them and taken off in their journey. They deployed SASE and have been really operating in great macro segmentation deployment, I would say, across 80,000 users. So Department of Interior is one. NASA is another one that's really been taken off as well recently. Have been helping people with their TMF proposals as well since we were the first TMF awardee. And on that note, I would say from a micro segmentation standpoint, that east-west traffic, capabilities have been in place for years. I know we got Gary and others on the call that, we can look at host-based micro segmentation, but you got to start somewhere. And I would say one place that everyone's lacked on, or maybe not everybody, but a majority have lacked on across the federal government, is that we haven't been taking advantage of the capabilities we've had in place. Next-gen firewalls as a primary example. We've been able to have, east-west segmentation, I would say, of traffic going through next-gen firewalls for over a decade. The thing is, not many folks have really gone to that level of granularity yet. So that's something where we are, the Department of Ed, doing. Some of the agencies I just mentioned are doing that as well now. Going into that next layer, and talking with Gary and others offline before, I have baked in contractual requirements as options to have host-based segmentation. So that way you're doing it all the way down to the, system level, and you're not relying on, piping your traffic through a firewall in order for it to come back out, permit statements and such. I would say I think FDIC has been piloting that. I believe Air Force was looking at doing stuff like that as well in the past. Not sure where they're at in their journey with microsegmentation. But again, kind of going back upwards, though, from a macro segmentation and just segmentation in general, all the agencies I just mentioned, including the one I'm working for right now, have made great strides in the last couple of years.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I love to share those success stories. So thank you for bringing some of those to us, Wayne. Always appreciative. Now, Mark, I know that you don't like to be self-serving on these shows, and we do appreciate that. But the truth is that when agencies are selecting products for Zero Trust and better risk management in general, they're also looking at the companies behind those products. So, I mean, along those lines, what should agencies look for in a vendor when it comes to Zero Trust? What are the key qualities that industry can bring to the table to help with this complicated process?
Thanks, John. Yeah. Most clients that I speak to aren't sure where to start, to be honest. And as I mentioned earlier, working with a solution provider can help organizations conduct security capability reviews, look for tool gaps, looking for overlap, and even help develop their vendor selection criteria where gaps may exist. But first, we need to understand what problem that the federal client's trying to solve or what service they're trying to provide. And of course, a solution provider can help with that too. And federal agencies should be looking for partnerships that bring that value, right? To focus a second on value that I've been working on at Optiv ClearShark, for federal agencies, I created a detailed process called PLAN. It's a 4-step process. A PLAN is an acronym. It's a 4-step process consisting of prepare, layout, action, and nurture that helps decompose the zero trust implementation into bite-sized chunks to make it a little easier for federal clients. But and I'm happy to share that with anyone who wants to learn more. But in the case of microsegmentation, proven implementations and solutions that meet the regulatory mandates of the day are the desire for the clients. In addition, solutions with characteristics such as training, detailed documentation, features that make it harder to make risky mistakes, and then also solutions that are easy to use, like AppGate and Illumio. And that's really what clients are seeking, right? The last thing you want is a security tool that is prone to user mistakes. That's just a disaster waiting to happen.
I can imagine. Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate you being here as always. Now, Tammy, one of the elements of this that sometimes gets overlooked are the people and the users who get to interact within these newly protected zero trust systems and microsegmented systems. I think Bob brought that up a little bit, that in certain environments, I guess, if you have missiles coming in and you want to, you need to activate your counter systems, you don't want the computer to tell you, no, sure, just provide me 3 forms of identification and we'll see how that works. So how critical is it that users get a seamless experience, especially for warfighters, where they're protected by zero trust or even segmentation, but they're not hindered or delayed by those protections when trying to do their jobs? How can that be achieved?
It's very, very, very important. And it has to be as seamless as synchronized swimmers. You want to make sure that your users are not hindered by any type of cyber implementation that you're doing to a system. Because the first thing they're going to say is, oh, well, cyber made us where we couldn't do this, or cyber made us where we couldn't log onto the system. And you don't want that to happen on a ship. You don't want that to happen on a shore trying to talk to a ship. And so using zero trust, you're able to do those segmentations so that you're able to give that user what they need when they need it. And so it's like security in the past was, okay, you get to see the whole floor, you get to see the whole building, all the printers in the building. Well, now with zero trust, you're going to see the resources that you can access right there, right then. And then once you don't need them, they go away. And so it makes it where it's a better user experience. It gives the user where it could increase their speed to the network. For the Navy, we're using a lot of data analytics so that we can crunch the information and measure it to see, what's coming in fast, what's coming in slow, what type of users we have on the network. And I'm pretty sure the warfighter would definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Tammy. It was great having you. I'm really glad that you were able to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Jennifer, I know you're quite the expert in cybersecurity, even if you say you're not. I know that you are, and I really appreciate you being here to talk about zero trust and microsegmentation. But as you know, it all comes down to, in government, and I believe you said this before, doing what you can with what you have. So along those lines, do you have any parting advice about how agencies can help to budget for their zero trust initiatives without compromising the inherent security advantages that zero trust and ultimately microsegmentation offers?
Absolutely. And some of my colleagues on the call have already talked about, going for the gold. And you got to prioritize. What's key here is thinking about how you institutionalize ZTA within your various environments, using your tools and technologies that you already have in your environment, like Wayne just highlighted, right? You may not always need to acquire new services. You may need to inquire some, but using the resources you already have in-house, clearly lay out to your leadership what is and what isn't, and how you can just properly assess where it is you need to go, and how you can institutionalize for your environment to strengthen your cybersecurity protections toward these new pillars in all the organizational structures according to the priorities for your organization. If your priority for your organization is to strengthen your identity management and access systems, do that. If your priority needs to be in your network monitoring capabilities, focus on that. If it's in the logging and the retention or you need to look at your forensic analysts and actually your people, your personnel resources, focus on that. You can't prioritize everything. Everything is not a P1, everything is not a P2. You also have to look at, yes, we have the Technology Modernization Fund, and there's also other emergency funds that we can pull from. But you have to also just look at the full life cycle of what's going to be needed now as we're planning, usually for about 3 to 4 fiscal years in advance. But then also looking at the unintended obstacles and consequences that could occur from, yes, we have the emerging technologies and those additional cyber risks that are coming, but the threats from around the globe. So planning for those potential risks that could come and looking at those in addition to the priorities that you have that say, hey, I need these additional funds should this situation occur. Because what happens is when the incident happens, when the potential data compromisation happens, then we have to quickly assess and reassess and reprioritize. And that's where we have to readjust the budgeting, and it becomes a little difficult. So really look at ways to just strengthen that effort as you plan accordingly. And unfortunately, oftentimes you're looking at, we talked about a lot of the vulnerabilities, the CrowdStrikes, the SolarWinds, they often happen outside of the budget cycles. So you have to look at what is and how we can move forward with what it is we have.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Always a great way to kind of wrap up your segment of the show. And thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us today, as always. So, absolutely. Always great to have you. So, Gary, over to you. Thank you also for being with us today. It was really great hearing your points, and I really appreciate you kind of talking about ZTS and ZTNA earlier in the show to kind of level set things for our audience. As a final question to you, let me ask you if you could maybe explain how ZTS and ZTNA can work together, why it's so critical that they do so, and how that's symbiotic relationship, if you will, can be achieved.
Sure, absolutely. So, when you look at Zero Trust, and we talked about this earlier, it's not a single person event, it's a team event, right? So all your Zero Trust solutions really need to integrate and work well together. You take a good Zero Trust segmentation solution, it should have good visibility across your entire enterprise, all the communications that are occurring, the applications that are on your enterprise, and as individual components of those applications maybe spin up and spin down. Because it's got all that information and all that knowledge about an enterprise, that is gold for a ZTNA solution, right? That is absolutely critical information that a good ZTNA solution requires in order to do its function in life, which is to ensure that it's granting access to the appropriate resources under the appropriate conditions. So none of these solutions should be working in their own sandbox, right? They should all be working together. They should all be rowing cohesively so they can cross the finish line together. So I think it's absolutely critical that you've got solutions that integrate well with each other so that they can take advantage of each other's strengths and help compensate for each other's weaknesses.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense, definitely. And Jay, that means you get the final word on the show today. We really appreciated your insights on this topic and for answering some of our audience questions earlier as well. You always bring such good advice to the discussion. So as my final question for you today, we covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, even with a 90-minute show. I feel like we could have probably talked for another hour or so. So can I ask you to maybe summarize some of the discussion today and reiterate the most important items that you want to make sure our audience takes away from the show today on Zero Trust and microsegmentation?
Right. And so what I would say with Zero Trust and microsegmentation, it's really, it's a triathlon, right? It requires policy, it requires technology, and it requires people. And you're going to have to you're going to have to change your practices. You're going to have to change the way in which you purchase and integrate things. And you're also going to have to really understand the way in which your organization will change over time and your relationship to the technology. And lastly, what I tell a lot of people that is that Zero Trust is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? That we're going to be talking about Zero Trust not for the next 2 years. This is not a fad. It's not a 2-year journey. It's not a 3-year journey. This is a 10-year plus journey. The best companies in the world have taken 10 years to get to where they're at. And so especially in the military where we have leadership changeovers every 2 to 3 years, it's going to be incredibly difficult to keep the focus on and the urgency on continuing to improve the security of our baseline, continue to iterate and to just level up in this area. And so a lot of people are really kind of at the opening ceremonies of their zero trust journey. And so what I would ask is for everyone to just be aware, let your leadership know that you're going to be talking about this for a long time, and that this isn't a fad that's going to go away. This isn't a flash in the pan. This is the new normal. And we'll just be constantly improving our security posture forever. And it's a huge challenge, but it's something that we have to rise to the occasion on.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jay. Excellent way to end the show. We really appreciate that. And thank you all for talking with me and our audience today about this fascinating topic. I learned so much today. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you to our superstar speakers today, Jennifer, Jay, Bob, Wayne, Tammy, Mark, Gary, and Jonathan, for joining us to talk about this really critical topic for our amazingly attentive audience. And thank you also to our amazing audience today. I'm so glad that you were all with us today. And please check out our schedule of future shows. We have a lot of great content like this coming up right around the corner, and I hope to see you all there. So with that, let me turn things over now to Fed Insider's Claudia Hosky for some final thoughts for our amazing audience today. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, John. And thanks again to all of our panelists today for that fabulous conversation. And to our audience, thank you for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to check out fedinsider.com so you can see what's coming up and register for multiple webinars at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.